Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Unlock Enterprise Databases to Create New Online Services with Magnolia and Grails. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Ben Price, Marketing Coordinator here at Magnolia CMS, and I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what we'll be covering in this webinar, together with a few housekeeping items. All attendees are muted, but this doesn't mean that you can't ask any questions. Feel free to submit them using the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll do our best to answer them all during the Q&A session at the end of this webinar. 1 or 2 days after the webinar, we'll be posting a video recording of the presentation on our website, as well as the presentation slides, and we'll send an email to everyone as well with links to all the material. After the webinar, we'll give you also contact details to be able to contact the presenter directly. You'll get that information as well. And if you wish to tweet about the webinar at any time, we just ask that you include the hashtags, which you can see here on your screen. Today's webinar is going to take around 30 or 40 minutes, depending on how many questions we get through. We'll basically give you a brief background to Grails and Magnolia CMS technology. Then we'll show you how to use information from enterprise databases with Magnolia CMS-based websites using the Magnolia on Grails plugin. And then, like I mentioned, we'll conclude with the Q&A session. And we encourage everyone to submit any questions during the webinar. Okay, introductions. I'd like to, in a moment, introduce you the presenter for today's webinar. That's going to be Peter Weiner, who is the author of more than a dozen books and frequent contributor to many newspapers and magazines. You can find out more about him by visiting the URL, which you can see on your screen. So without further ado, I'll hand over to our presenter, Peter, and thank him for joining us today. Over to you, Peter.
Hi, thanks very much, Ben. Just to give you guys a quick list of the agenda, we're going to introduce Magnolia and Grails, then we're going to hook them up, and then we're going to show you how you can produce websites filled with content and tabular data. So those are the 3 main points, and let's dive in. Okay, so maglev is a technology that the Magnolia community built, and it's designed to join 2 different disparate worlds. On one hand, you have Grails, which builds table-driven data, and it's good for displaying information that happens to fall inside tables. And the other side, you have Magnolia, which is a template-driven system. And Magnolia is very good for kind of gluing together the things that you're going to see on a website. Those are going to be images. They're going to be text. There's going to be paragraphs. And those all fall into templates, and those templates fall into blocks, and they're kind of put together like Legos. So, of course, the question is it possible to mix the ease of Grails with Magnolia? And the answer is yes. And so now let's go a little bit deeper and let's start to introduce these things, and then maybe we'll be able to figure out why. Now, I don't know if anyone's been following it, but Grails has been around for a while now, and it's a Java-based web app framework. It's open source, it's extendable with plugins, it has a wonderful community. The community is filled with people who are producing tools that make it very easy to add lots of the different new ideas and widgets and things to your Grails website. It's also template driven, but the templates here there are 2 different kinds. The JSP, which I think many people in the Java world are familiar with, and the GSP, which is more or less the same thing, but the G stands for Groovy. Now, what I haven't mentioned here, but what I think is the key thing about Grails is that it's written in Groovy. And Groovy is kind of a subset of Java, and I think people are going to debate that, and they're going to want to argue about what exactly Groovy happens to be. But it's a kind of a simpler version of Java, which will allow you to kind of write your programs in a lot cleaner syntax. And the people who love Groovy love it because it has fewer punctuation marks, and you can get what you want done with fewer keystrokes. I suppose there are going to be some purists out there who will disagree with whether this is a good thing or not, but let's not argue with it. Grails is a wonderful project, and it's got a lot of momentum behind it, and so that's why we wanted to look at hooking it up with Magnolia. Now, Magnolia is similar. It's also Java-based. It's also open source. It's also extendable with plugins, and there's also a vibrant community producing lots of different plugins for um, Magnolia. And it's also template-driven, but you'll notice that I've mentioned that there are two slightly different types of templates. You can also use JSPs and Magnolias if you want, but there's also something called a free marker template. And the free marker template uses a slightly different syntax. But in both cases, they're very similar here. But you'll notice that Magnolia is content management system, while Grails is designed for table-driven. And as I mentioned before, when I say content management system, I kind of mean the thing that a company is going to turn to when it wants to produce something really solid that's going to be its front door on the website. And it's going to, people are going to be able to drill down, and they're going to be able to get the information they need, but it's going to be presented in kind of a consistent way. And the reason we have content management websites is because they take care of the presentation, and they allow you to kind of put your text and your paragraphs and images, and then they format it in a consistent and hopefully, eye-catching way. So let me tell you a little bit about Maglev. It was developed by Kimo Bjornsson and, I'm sorry, Ake Argeus, which I hope I've pronounced correctly. But they're the lead developers at Bonio AB, which is a wonderful shop that produces lots of different tools, including Magnolia websites. And they were looking at Magnolia, and they saw that Magnolia did many of the things they wanted, but they also looked at Grails, and they said that Grails was wonderful for some things. And so they decided that the two things needed to be joined, and they created Maglev. And they essentially turned Magnolia into a plugin that lives in Grails. Now, as you remember before, I mentioned that both of these technologies have plugin frameworks, so you can extend them in many different ways. And so it's theoretically possible we could have taken Grails and plugged it into Magnolia. But what these guys did is they looked at it and they said it makes more sense to take Magnolia and turn it into a Grails plugin. Now, what's fascinating about this is that even though you can think of the plugin as being kind of the smaller entity, or the one that lives inside of Grails, I found that when I use this tool, I end up making Magnolia the front end. And so for the person coming in from the web, they're going to see Magnolia first, and then they're going to dig around, and eventually they'll get to content that's produced by Grails. So I think that's a little bit ironic, given that technically Magnolia is just a little plugin, but that's kind of how it often ends up working. And once you join these two together, of course, the smart thing is to use them to do what they do best, which is the table-driven objects in Grails, and Magnolia handles the content. Now, technically, I should mention that you could do it the other way around if you really wanted to mess around with it, but why bother? This is why the reason we're joining these things together is because we want to use their strong points. Okay, so why are you going to want to do this? Well, the reason I love Grails, and the reason I think a lot of people do, is that it's built for rapid prototyping. We're going to see this in a second, but if your boss comes to you and says, I want the database, and I want it to hold these tables, and I want each table to have these columns, and I want you to just get this done and get it done now. Well, Grails is great for that. It's very easy to put a front end on a database, and it takes very few keystrokes, and boom, you're done. Now, what are the other benefits? Well, Magnolia does a great job of integrating content. It's a content management system. You have your paragraphs. You have all of the data you want to present, or the images. Magnolia juggles those very well. And the other benefit, I think, of this is that we're kind of following the standard rule that you see around in lots and lots of Java, well-built Java web stacks, is that you separate the code from the presentation. So in this case, the Grails code handles the back end for the data, and Magnolia handles the front. And we're separating these out so people, when people want to mess around with it, they want to change it, they want to improve it, they know where to go. Now, in a few minutes, a few slides, I'm going to start building an example. And the example is not at all contrived. I think it's an ideal example, but it's built around affiliate marketing. And the standard way that affiliate marketing works is it's kind of pay per click. So you'll notice there are a lot of different stores on the web will offer someone a commission if they bring a customer to the store. And the way affiliate-based advertising works is the store doesn't pay you anything until someone actually buys something. So what the common way this is kind of found in the web is that there'll be sites that will, maybe let's say they'll have lots of different pictures of clothes that they recommend. And if someone who comes to that site clicks on the clothes and then goes through and they buy the clothes, then the original website gets a cut. Now, the way you're going to implement that is we're just going to have a table of URLs. And each URL is going to have a little description. And then we put those in a table, and then you'll be able to display them on a Magnolia template. And I'm not going to do a particularly elaborate example. It's just going to display them in a list. But you can go back and you can schmaltz that up or make that as fancy as you want. But we're just going to do that in a simple way because we want to show you how the piping works and how the connections, and give you a feel for just how simple it can be. Okay, now before I mentioned that Grails doesn't need very much. Well, when I first started out with this example, I created a file and I typed in affiliate item, and I created this class affiliate item. And you'll notice that there are 7 lines underneath those, and each of those 7 lines corresponds to a column in the table. So there'll be one column for a name, there'll be another column for a URL, then there are a couple columns for the different descriptions, and I've also got some dates in there. Now, I don't know if the dates are strictly necessary, but I find that when I build these systems, it's good to kind of keep track when you insert stuff into these tables, and you might want to have a date when this particular row in the database is active and when it isn't. So I put a start date and a stop date. So I've got 7 lines here. Maybe I don't need as many. Maybe you would add some more. But this is all I did. Now, another thing you'll notice about this is that maybe 60% of the characters on this screen are just comments. So I didn't have to write very much. And the comments I just put in, for everybody's edification. But you don't really need to add very much. And you push this, you put this into Grails, you define this class, and I'll just show you. You can also add this one. This is pretty much all you need to do. I'm sorry. Now, another thing you can do, you can add with Grails are constraints for these tables. So in this case, this is just some sample constraints I added. I said that the name can't be blank and it has to be unique. So when someone adds an item to this table, the Grails will automatically make sure that the name is only found in one and only one row. And the same thing I did for the URL. And Grails has got a number of different things it can do to check the data. In this case, it checks to make sure that the data is really, truly a URL, and that the description is only 26 characters long, and the long description can be, arbitrarily long. So you put these 2 lines in to Grails, and then you just need one extra file. And you'll see this, I called this class the affiliate item controller. And I just have one line. And the one line is a static. It says scaffold equals true. And this is all that I need to define. Now this is where the power of Grails comes in. The scaffolding is a term that the Grails folks use to describe all of the different methods for creating a table, creating a new object, moving this into the database, deleting one if someone needs to delete something, all the different kind of housekeeping methods that one would normally write just to update a database table and keep it filled with what you want to change. And so I would put this into Grails, and then I would say, Grails, go to it. And Grails goes and it builds these methods. Another term people use for it sometimes is CRUD, which is create, update and delete. And it goes and analyzes the object definition. It reaches out to the database, and it says, I want a table that has these 7 columns. And then it creates all the code that you're going to need to build up this table and keep it. Now, in many cases, you may end up with like 10 different object descriptions, and it will build them all for you automatically and juggle it all and handle all those constraints. And you obviously aren't going to be able to read any of the code here, but this is just an example of some of the code that Grails builds in the background, and it just does all this for free. And then you push the button, and then all of a sudden, this is what the user sees. And this is a page that Grails pops up, and this is the edit page that you can use to edit the list of affiliate items. And I added 3 rows here on my own when I was experimenting with this, but they all show up in these tables. And you can go and there's plenty of Grails code for customizing this and making this list look a little bit bigger or look a little bit better. You can change which columns show up. You can change how the dates are formatted, and you can do all those kind of things. So I didn't do any of that. What you saw, those 3 files, or that code that you've seen so far on those 3 slides, is all I added to build this. So you can see, and if you wanted to add a new item, you click here, and it would give you the form, and it would fill it out, and then the table would get fatter. And this is, so as you can see, this kind of flexibility is why people love to start off with Grails, and they love to be able to prototype stuff, and they love to be able to add stuff quickly to your website. So that's why people use Grails, and that's the first, the slideshow that Syntax did. So now, what does Magnolia do? It's going to need a controller that's going to search the tables for what it wants, and it's going to have to be able to display it. So I'm not going to spend any time going into the depths of Magnolia. You guys can. I'm assuming that some of the people here are old Magnolia hands, and other people are just exploring. But you can go and you can dig in it and figure it out for yourself. But just in case there's some people who aren't completely familiar with Magnolia, it builds the websites up with all these different blocks. It's a little bit like using Legos. And what we want is we want to write some code that's going to take the data that Grails has been managing, and it's going to display it in a block so you can put it in your website wherever you want it to be. And you can move these blocks around. You can arrange perhaps for a block to always be on the left-hand side, or it could be in the footer of these particular types of pages. But these are the kind of things that Magnolia does well. So we need just 2 parts for this. We need a controller that's going to do kind of all the back-end glue code for Magnolia, and it's going to be yet another controller, but it's going to work with the other one. And then we're going to need a template that's going to format it. So this is the Magnolia code, and you'll see again it looks a lot like Java, but it's of course this is the way we've written it for Grails and Magnolia getting along together. And these are the key parts. The affiliate item.count and affiliate item.list. These are 2 static methods that Grails produced for us. I didn't write any of that code. But the first one is going to return an integer that's going to explain, count the number of affiliate items that are in the table. And the other is going to actually produce a list. And the list is going to be a standard Java collection. So all the stuff you know about Java is something you could insert here if you wanted to do it. But this is a very thin amount of glue code. And it's going to bundle the results from those 2 static calls into a data structure. And you can see those kind of square brackets there. And the square brackets mean we're going to produce a data structure, and it's going to have 2 fields. One of them is going to be count, and it's going to hold the result of calling that one static method, and the second is going to be items, and it's going to hold the result of calling the second one. And every time you fire up the main template controller with the index, it's going to calculate this. Now, you'll see another little bit of code up here, and this is a template, and it looks a little bit like the Java annotations that we've started to get to know pretty well. And it just has 2 different bits here. One is the title, which could be anything you want, and it's a little bit cosmetic. And the second is the ID, which contains the kind of piping information, and it tells Grails and Magnolia how these are going to be glued together, and where people are going to be able to find it. So when you're laying out your Magnolia website, you're going to look for this demo template page, and that's where all of the information from Grails is going to appear. So that's going to be the template, and it's going to glue it together, and this is the code that we need to do that. Now, let me show you the Index.gsp. This is going to be the template that we're going to use to display everything. Okay, and this is going to be the template that Magnolia is going to find, and it's going to be the one that's going to be in that demo pages, etc. And this is some groovy code that's embedded in some HTML. So if you look around the top, you'll see, oh, well, this looks like HTML, and it is HTML. And you look around here, and then this doesn't look like HTML, and it isn't. This down here is going to be the groovy code, and we'll go through that in a second. But in general, this should be very familiar to anyone who's built kind of some, JSPs around. And the only difference is that it's got groovy code instead of Java. But the structure underneath is very similar, and so the functionality will be similar. A few of the different punctuation marks will be different, and we'll go into those in a second. So the first part is the count. Now you remember we bundled this in this data structure and the count here. So what the count does is it doesn't actually call affiliate items.count. It just looks in that data structure we built in that index method. And that data structure before, remember, count is going to hold an integer. And so we just use the generic display method from Java to display that integer with this %sign equals, which is the standard JSP form for displaying some data. And then this is going to put it in the middle of some HTML, and it's going to say there are 8, or there are 3, or there are 7 affiliate items, or whatever the number is. And then this code below is going to be a loop. And you'll notice that there's at the top of the loop, there's a for loop kind of, hold on here. This is like a for loop, and it matches up with the closing tag right here. And it says we're just going to go through everything in the items field. And it's going to expect a collection, and it's going to dig inside there, and it's going to say, oh, well, here's a collection. I'm going to go through each of these items in turn, and we're going to put them in the variable x, and then we're going to execute all the code in here. And you'll notice most of the code in here is just regular HTML, but there's going to be some fields, and it's going to do x.url, which of course is the URL that's in the table, and then there's going to be x.name, which is the name of the item, and then there's x.long description. And you'll see I didn't do anything with a lot of those other fields I had that I put in there. So I don't touch the short description, although we could do that. Maybe you could have the short description, and then you'd have the long description show up in a hovering field. You could make the HTML here be pretty complex. And the other thing I haven't shown you is that I haven't inserted any of the glue logic. Well, it would be very easy to put a little if statement in here that said if the date is within the range, or you're past the start date but not past the end date. You can do a lot of the different glue logic here, but I don't want the slide to get too complicated. Okay, at this point, Magnolia takes over, and this becomes a template for Magnolia. And every time Magnolia is looking for this block, and you can control with Magnolia where the blocks appear, well, Magnolia is just going to go to that glue code. The glue code's going to fetch all the information from Grails, and then the Grails block will sit next to the other. So that's all you need to do. We didn't write very much code at all. We wrote a definition for the table. We wrote a controller, which didn't do much at all, which just had one line that said that there's going to be a scaffolding, and then Grails did the rest for us. And then all of a sudden we had a neat back end that we could use to edit this table. Then we just needed to write a little bit of code that would suck the information out, and it would put it into a data structure that the other table would do. So we only messed around with 4 different files. and then all of a sudden we have something where the information is going to pop out on the website. Well, you can do a lot more with this. I haven't touched any of the complexity, and I haven't used any of the power really that Java has. So you can create more complicated templates with more elaborate HTML, or you can add more logic to the controllers. I think the smart place to put in some of the date control logic would be in the controller that would filter through them as they come by. But then Magnolia is going to glue them all into a nice layout. Now, we put together a bunch of different resources you can use, and they're going to be coming along, I think, in a email that follows up this call. But there'll be an introduction, so you can go and you can read, you know, an article version of what I've pretty much told you, which has a lot more information. You can go and you can read the maglev quick start, which is a quick way of getting maglev running. The maglev downloads are here. There's a Jira site devoted to it. And then finally, you know, there's another presentation that the folks who created maglev produced. So, and I guess that's all the information that you have at your disposal. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay, great, Peter. Thanks very much for that. And yes, we do have quite a few questions for you. We have a lot of them coming in now. So to the audience, if you do have any more questions, please feel free to submit them as we're going through these. So first of all, Peter, perhaps first of all, what type of website would be good for the Magnev plugin? And could you give a few good examples?
Sure. I think it would be great for any kind of data-driven website for kind of a company that it wants to share data with some of its users. So what Magnolia is good for is just producing the kind of 4-color brochure. But if you want some people to be able to kind of run tabular data, say you're running something like eBay, where you have data that people post, or you have a list of, say, Broadway productions or theater productions that are available to people who come to your site. Or if you're going to have a kind of changing array of cool clothing that you want to provide links to, like what I showed you with the affiliate example we did. You're going to come to maglev and you're going to say, well, you know, I want the tabular data to be in maglev, and I want the presentation to be in Magnolia, and then they'll live happily together.
Okay, and another question here right in there is it possible to do this inside Magnolia without maglev?
Well, sure, you can write all of that code yourself. I mean, the reason you want to use Grails is because Grails is optimized for producing this tabular data and making it look pretty. But there's no reason why you can't write some of that code yourself. It doesn't take that long to write the glue code. It doesn't take that long to move the data in and out of the tables. And you could write your own little plugin for Magnolia that would handle all these kind of tabular things, and then it would all be written in Magnolia itself, and you wouldn't need to, you know, deal with Grails and the complexity of that if you wanted to do it that way. But, you know, I think if you have any familiarity with Grails, and it doesn't take very long to get familiar with it, then you'll enjoy just the rapid prototyping and all the hand-holding it does.
Okay, we have quite a lot of questions here, so I'm going to start going through all of these as well. I'm not sure you have the answer to this one, Peter, but could you point out the difference between this the maglev module, which you've just gone through, and the Grails Blossom plugin? Are you aware of the difference between these two? Have you heard of the differences?
You know, I'm not familiar enough with the differences I'm really just familiar with maglev, but I do know that Blossom's out there, and I think one of the neat things about an open source community, and these are both two vibrant open source communities, is that you're going to see people starting to glue it together in a number of different ways, and they'll share their experimentation. And I think, you know, in a few years we'll know that one way is better than the other, perhaps, or maybe we'll have two great ways of doing it.
Okay, thanks. Next here, Does the plugin support all databases and web servers that Grails supports out of the box, or are there any limitations?
No, Grails is doing all that work for you. So if Grails can talk to the database, then this would work with the database, because all that work is done over in Grails land, and so it has nothing. This piping and these connections have nothing to do with that.
Okay, and how does Maglev support content personalization? For example, is it possible that, for example, a retail user, a visitor to a site, sees something different than a corporate user or a visitor?
You know, you can include the logic in two different places. You can include it down in the Grails layer, where it knows something about, it somehow figures out what status the person has, and then it puts the data together. So you can do it way down in here, in the in this controller here, but I would think that putting it into this kind of template controller is the best place. There's no reason why you can't put it even higher up in the whole mechanism. Like Magnolia has a way of saying, show this block to someone who's an admin, but don't show a different block to someone who's a customer. And you may end up, maybe the smartest way to do this is to produce two different templates, one for the admin and one for the customer, and let Magnolia be smart about who gets to see which block.
Okay, and a question here I'm not sure you're going to have the answer to, but how active is the Maglev project? The plugin doesn't seem to be compatible with the more recent versions of Grails.
Yeah, I think, we're looking at that, and I think that's certainly frustrating to me, because I'd love to see that the code would just work perfectly when I would use it. But I end up just using an earlier version of Grails when I use it, and that's fine for me. Certainly, we're hoping that someone will update it and share their results, or you can update it yourself. The code's all there, and it's all open source. And so I think if anybody can step forward and share the most recent version and handle that, that would be wonderful. But there's no reason you can't just move back to a slightly earlier version of Grails and work with that. That's what I end up doing.
Okay, thanks. And what is the preferred approach to adding dynamic content to the standard templating kit, the Magnolia CMS SDK, and FreeMarker, Blossom, Spring, or Grails?
Oh, I mean, preferred. I'm sure we could get 5 people and have 10 different opinions, and we could argue about this for a long time. I've spoken with some folks who go on and on about how FreeMarker is absolutely the best way, and the other, nothing else is close to it. I tend to be a little bit more agnostic, and I'm happier with all of them. So, but I think you'll have to make up your own mind. But certainly, I have had people bend my ear and say that FreeMarker is the best. So, I think there's some strength in that community.
Okay, we have plenty more questions. We'll see how far we get through them. We noticed that the structured data plugin from Magnolia has a dependency issue with Grails regarding cache versions. Is this going to be solved? Is this something you're aware of?
Is it going to be solved? I think there's no reason why it can't be. It's kind of it doesn't strike me as a particularly bad issue, but until that comes along, I think we're just going to have to find ways to work around it. And I'm hoping that someone is going to take a really wonderful solution and a graceful one and contribute it and distribute that code.
Okay. Another question. Your example controller was a Blossom controller. Is that correct? Isn't there a way to write a generic Blossom controller that would delegate to an actual Grails controller?
Yes, you could do it that way too.
Okay. There's a question here how both applications are actually deployed, Grails plus Magnolia.
The way I end up deploying it is I just deploy. I build a Grails website, and then I put the maglev plugin there, and put that in charge for Grails. But to the deployer, to the guy doing the deploying, he's going to say, "Oh, I'm just building a Grails website that happens to have this one plugin maglev there." So, you know, the kind of rules you need to do for deploying it are you build it the way you build a Grails site.
Okay, and is the code for the templates reloaded as I change it, i.e. as is typical for Grails development?
Yes.
Okay, is the short answer. Thank you.
Yeah,
And
it's very interactive, and you can build a lot of things, and it's very dynamic, and it's a nice way to work.
okay. Question, the Index.gsp is the template of a single component, is that correct?
Let's see, Index.gsp. Yes, it becomes the template, yes.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts, Peter, on how this compares with using the Magnolia CMS data module? For example, it seems like it could be implemented with both.
Yes, definitely it could be implemented in both, and it depends how you like to work. Um, I really like Grails, and I think that there's some people out there who really love Grails. So if you're in that camp and you like to be able to work in Groovy, then this is your way to continue to work in Groovy and build your websites and do a good job with them. But there's no reason you can't use the data module. And I think that if you're familiar with that, then you'll be able to do much of the same thing.
Okay, and you mentioned earlier on about some typical examples of sites which could be suitable for using this plugin. But are you aware of any sites which are in production using this plugin?
You know, I'm not aware of any that are really big production sites, but certainly like we played around and turned things on for a while and had people use them. I'm hesitant to say that, someone's running, Facebook on something like this because I don't know of anything like that.
Okay. Question, what database is used with Grails? Are there connectors to different types of databases?
Yes, there are definitely a lot of different, connectors. It starts off, I'm pretty sure, with Derby, although it might be using HBase. To be honest, one of the interesting things about using Grails is I forget what it's doing until I actually want to, unless I need to connect it up to MySQL or Oracle. But it just does it, and so I don't even think so much about the database layer. It's buried in there, and I don't have to worry about it.
Okay, and a question here, how to integrate maglev with the STK, which is Magnolia's standard templating kit?
I I would just use it as a separate block and let maglev do what it does and let STK handle everything else. But I haven't gone to the trouble of actually calling those functions, but the glue code should be there, and you should be able to call that controller and get the response and take it apart yourself. But I haven't tried it myself, but I think that would work.
Okay, there are plenty more questions coming through, so I'll keep them coming in your way, Peter. The Magnolia website can be mixed, and it will handle normal URLs for static pages. Both Grails URLs and Magnolia URLs are recognized.
Yeah, and if you look in the article that we the text article that kind of accompanies this, it goes into a little bit more detail there. But you can they're both there, and you as a result you kind of have this kind of admin layer where you can mess around with the tables and you can use the different CRUD functions to do that. And that's all in Grails world, and then the Magnolia world lives right alongside it in the same URL space.
And question, what is the special benefit of Magnolia, using Magnolia CMS in addition to Grails?
I think Magnolia is a very nice CMS, and I think it depends what you're building. If you just want to do tables, then you don't need it. If you want to kind of have a complex website that has paragraphs here, and the paragraphs are always formatted in a consistent way, and you're going to have different pages that have a consistent look, and you want the look to be streamlined, and you want the designer to come in and change that around, then that's why you need a CMS. So that's why you want to use that's when you're going to want to use the CMS. If you're just going to have tables, if you're just going to have kind of, the CRUD and the CRUD tables, then now you don't need the Magnolia part. But if you want to kind of have elaborate kind of structures that were, websites where people can drill down and it's always going to be consistent and it's going to look good, then you want Magnolia.
Okay, and if I have a website made of normal Magnolia plus multiple applications, is there a way to have everything sharing the same LNF?
LNF, you mean?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm also not look and feel. Here we go.
Oh, look and feel. Yes, the way you want the look and feel is that, I mean, you can see here in this Index.gsp, well, it gives a class. Well, you're going to assign the class and you're going to assign the look and feel all in Magnolia. And so if you've got your, in the Magnolia website and you're dealing with the CSS and that's where you're defining the classes, well, then you just make sure you use the same class name over in the Groovy layer over in Grails land. And when all this HTML pops out of the big machine, the CSS will make sure everything looks consistently, and it'll have the same look and feel.
Okay, thanks. And question here, do I actually run two web applications, one for Magnolia and one for Grails? And if so, how are these two connected to each other?
Well, the maglev is just a whole is a version of Magnolia, but it's a plugin. And so like I said before, when you're installing this and you're deploying this, you just go, well, I'm going to deploy some Grails, and it's going to look like a Grails web app at that layer. But buried deep inside of it, of course, is an entire copy of Magnolia running along and doing what Magnolia does best. So it kind of depends how you look at it. You can look at it as, oh, I'm just running Grails, and there's this little plugin thing over here. Or you can think of it as two separate versions that are all connected, two different web apps that are connected. Certainly at the highest layer, it just looks like Grails.
Okay, great. I have another question. How do you create URLs to certain items that you manage in the Grails application?
The same way you would normally do it. The Grails URL space is there, and it's kind of right alongside the Magnolia one. So if any way you do it with Grails is going to work here too.
Okay, thanks very much, Peter. And that looks like, you can take a deep breath now, it looks like we've come to the end of the questions. Thanks, everyone. That was a great list of questions for Peter. And unless there are any more questions, then I would say that concludes today's webinar. Thanks very much, Peter, for joining us and for your time. Thanks to everyone for participating as well. We're glad that you could join us. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we'll be sending an email around to everyone with links to the recording and all the further reading which Peter was referring to. So once again, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks to everybody. Thanks for showing up.